All right, so I'm here to talk a little bit about responsible AI and diversity as innovation. So I think it comes as no surprise that AI is being globally adopted at an extremely high rate. So none of this is news to you all. But so have AI incidents. As you can see to the right, there's a hugely large spike, and that's primarily from Gen AI and the adoption of Gen AI. This is actually data that's collected by the OECD. And in this example, this is an example of London's mayor as a deep fake that caused quite a bit of challenge and concern. But beyond that, inference challenges and bias are becoming a much more common situation. And these are actually recent data points, but nearly 70% of all data, and actually 60%, this just came out in 2025, of AI deployments still fail due to risk in building these systems. Misinformation is a large risk, reputational risk, which is incredibly costly, bias and inaccuracies, and last but not least, security and data privacy. What's also really interesting is that Gartner does a top 10 predictions every year, and one of their predictions is that up to 10% of company AI spend in the course of the next decade is going to be spent on addressing misinformation. That's actually a really staggering number. So what's been happening? Governments, standard bodies, and corporations have come to develop responsible AI frameworks. You may have seen some of them. NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, is one. The global OECD has created their own. And then there have also been corporations that have developed their own responsible AI frameworks, like Microsoft, Google, Meta, and even the Partnership on AI, which is a nonprofit that brings together experts as well as corporations to develop these standards. But there isn't really a one-size-fits-all approach. I think we can all agree that nobody wants to stifle innovation. Yet at the same time, we recognize that the more that AI gets adopted, the more important it is to have some level of guardrails or frameworks in which developers can build. So the EU, they actually passed the EU Artificial Intelligence Act. By show of hands, is anybody familiar with that? Okay, yeah, exactly. And that's really based off of 4 core pillars. Now, this compliance actually passed unanimously, like 2/3 to 1. So the first is on data governance. How do you know that the data sets that you're using are fit for the purpose of your application? How do you do that? How do you build that to the best extent possible that you've got the right data that is free of errors and that is complete? The second component of this is human oversight, right? How do you ensure that higher risk systems, whether it be financial services, insurance, things of that nature, have some level of human validation? The third is model evaluation, right? How do you establish a quality measurement system? So new models are being developed all the time, right? Llama 4.0 was dropped. There's going to be a new version and another version. We speak to clients often, lots of different companies who know that their technology may change, but that doesn't mean the purpose of your model changes. So you need to have a common framework in which you're managing and measuring this. And then last but not least, it's data privacy. But compliance, as I mentioned before, has been identified as a way to stifle innovation. So there have been plenty of bills that are overreaching, that are extremely challenging to ensure that you get to these frameworks. So one that's been very interesting that just came about is California Bill SB 813. And this is actually a bill that is a public-private partnership where instead of trying to drive this through compliance, it's actually about incentivizing developers to adopt responsible AI best practices. So these developers who can get certified by third parties actually get indemnification from legal action if they have been certified in these practices. So it's an interesting, very interesting concept about how to bring together the best of both worlds, because at the end of the day, engineers who are building these models, right? And creating an incentivization program is really quite interesting. All of these frameworks, they really have these things in common. One is about fairness, transparency, ultimately accountability, right? So how do you define those AI outcomes? Privacy, how effective is this model? Is it robust? And then ultimately human oversight. So why do this? Why does it matter, right? Responsible AI is better performing AI at the end of the day, right? To do this, we need to recognize that this technology is ubiquitous, right? I started this conversation by sharing that AI is a global phenomenon, global adoption. Well, so are products. And you want your products to work across borders and across geographies, across people. But at the end of the day, it's all about whether these models understand both the cost of failure and whether they're adopted. So one example I'd like to raise that has done an incredible job of this is Waymo. So they publish a report. They publish a report that shows that after 10 million rides and something like 50 million miles, their cars beat human drivers, if you will, or have better safety records from an accident standpoint by literally 10 to 1. Okay? 10 to 1, these autos are driving more miles with less accidents than humans. And this is the kind of trust that is really necessary for companies to adopt AI. The standard for AI performance is a lot higher than human performance. Okay? So why does this matter? Let's see, actually, let me go back one. Is that at the end of the day, many of these models and most models are now being developed off of foundation models. And those foundation models are trained on the internet. The internet isn't exactly completely representative of everybody and everything, right? So that's why you have to include specialized annotated data. And at the end of the day, that data needs to be validated, right? And I just like this picture because it's kind of funny. But at the end of the day, right, without the right data and model valuation practices in place, models can hallucinate, right? And this is a good example of hallucination. So why does human context matter? Okay, why can't we just synthetically generate everything? Well, the challenge is that models that are trained on models can carry forward their bias. And at the end of the day, you need to understand what you are training for. So I know there's a lot on this slide, but it's a pretty simple example. If you're building a model, right, and here's this model with parents pushing strollers, well, if you synthetically generate this, you may end up in situations where, for example, does this look right? Would you see a stroller without a baby in the middle of the street, right? Would you see a stroller without a baby? And these are some of the challenges is that as humans, we recognize that context. So oftentimes, even if synthetic data is being used to train models, there's actually a human validation component that's necessary to ensure that the synthetic data that's being created actually has the appropriate context. And ultimately, central to developing responsible AI beyond human insight is really data diversity. So that data diversity typically goes around demographics, environment, and language, edge cases, and modalities. So in terms of different environments, as an example, if you're building a self-driving car, you need to know if you're in Singapore, if drivers sit on the right side versus, for example, in China on the left side. So understanding that is really important because you want to reduce the overfitting of applications and to improve generalization that works across multiple regions. So one of the things that we've done as a company is we're actually building an Africa-centric data set. And the reason we're doing this for research purposes is because it's a region that has been consistently underrepresented in the world. So by building this additional data set, we hope that people, for example, can train their models to recognize and ultimately build applications that are more representative of where we live and where we live globally. The last thing I want to note, I know this is a little bit of a goofy slide, is that diversity is important not only in terms of data diversity, but it's also about who builds your AI. One of the practices that we have as a company is we not only hire at least 50% women, we actually carry that all the way through up to the top. And the reason being is that different people and different ideas breed, better and more rich results. If anybody here is an engineer, when did you ever get it right and all the requirements the first time? Probably never, right? Requirements are iterative. They continue to build. And so having people with a diversity of thinking, diversity of backgrounds is an incredible help because we are ultimately training AI that needs to learn from experience. And that's going to change over time. Last but not least, I just wanted to put a couple of points in here around responsible AI learnings. There are many different checklists that are out there, and I'd certainly be happy to share a bunch of different frameworks and references for how to develop responsible AI. But I think the point that I really wanted to share is ultimately this. Responsible AI it's a development framework, okay? It's not about necessarily just ethics or morality. It's really about how do you build a model that is performant to your application. And that really starts with practices that you think about when you begin to build a model, okay? So if anybody has, again, built models or built software, if you think about security as an afterthought, it's really challenging, right? So the idea here is think with these parameters in mind first. The first is what AI do you want to develop? How do you measure the effectiveness of that AI? Do you actually have a way in which you can measure it? Because the world changes, it changes constantly. How do you know if your model is right? If you change your model, the model that you're using, how do you ensure that, again, the application you're building is performant? So when you build this and you come up with these frameworks and you educate your developers on this up front, the ability to build models that are more performant, more accurate, is much, much higher. But it's really difficult to do if you do this midway through your process. So my recommendation is measure twice, cut once, have a plan. The tech is going to change, but the evaluation is not. Thank you, everybody.